Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. I'm Jenna Ellis. Join me tonight on Jenna Ellis Tonight on the Salem News Channel at 9 p.m. Eastern, while the Republican National Convention wrapped up last night with a rousing speech from Donald Trump. And there are a lot of MAGA conservatives that are very excited for a Trump-Vance ticket. We also saw a lot coming from the Republican National Convention that wasn't really all that conservative. So where do we go from here? Because obviously Donald Trump is so much better, 100% better than Joe Biden. But the Republican Party platform still really is not recognizing the traditional conservative values. I'll break it all down for you, give you my opinion on where conservative Christians need to go from here. And then we'll also hear from some really important guests who will give their opinion on how we can preserve and protect the U.S. Constitution for the next generation to come. Join me, 9 p.m. Eastern. My fellow Americans, we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been an absolute disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a consistent issue, and high interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East that have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even amid the tensions. There are so many reasons that Americans just like you and me should consider investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero hassle, education first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com to download their free gold investing guide. I've read it and there is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is not the time to roll the dice with your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals today and tell them that I sent you. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So the RNC convention concluded last night, and the entire week was a major victory for Donald Trump, who secured the party's nomination for a third time. So of course, the GOP elected officials and party officials across the nation are rallying to support behind him. And of course, the Democrats and the leftist mainstream media, even earlier this week, are calling out Donald Trump for being extremist and, the party that doesn't care about women and isn't pro-equality and inclusion and all of this other rhetorical nonsense. So what is the actual truth here, and what do conservatives need to understand? Because remember, this isn't just about being pro-Republican or anti-Democrat. This is all about ensuring that our plumb line as conservatives is always the truth. Well, my good friend Steve Deace from The Blaze posted this on his social media, and I want you to pay attention. This is a little bit long, but it's worthwhile. He says this: if you begin from a premise, we are in a post-Christian America, and thus in a negative world, everything you're seeing in the culture and politically starts to make sense. And I do mean everything. You may not like it, and if you're a Christian, you probably shouldn't like much of it, but at least you can make sense of it, and then have a sense of what to do in light of that. But if you don't start from this premise, you will be a believer out of time. Christ wants us to understand the signs of the times. Now, once we accept this premise, Christians are going to definitely disagree on how to proceed from there. The Apostle Paul spends much time in his epistles laying down the ground rules for navigating negative world, and even refereeing fights among believers who differ on what it means to be in the world but not of it. The reformers differed too, and a group called the Anabaptists emerged who thought it was basically impossible to be both, a citizen of heaven and this world without the stain of it staining you. So they sort of created Protestant monasticism, Quakers, Amish, Mennonites, etc. In gray areas or areas the Bible does not specifically address, for example, there aren't many examples of voting in the Bible, and the ones we have are bad, like give us Barabbas. The path to maintaining Christian unity in a negative world is to respect and defend the rights of conscience of one another. Thus, for example, if you think you can proceed into a sector of the culture without succumbing to it, don't shame those who disagree as less convicted than you. On the other hand, if you choose to abstain, believing you cannot, then don't self-righteously shame those who believe they can. This also explains why I, Steve, have not heavily invested in the platform fight. He's talking about the Republican Party platform. He says, I used to be laser focused on it when I first started out until I realized most of the Republicans I was voting for never read it and didn't care. So to me, all that's happened here is that we went from a great platform expressing Christian ethics, but also one the party rarely adhered to one that has limited expressions of Christian ethics, but comes from people more likely to at least act on those limited expressions. Is that better or worse? I don't know. So that's not my fight, and I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze in a negative world. You may disagree. I respect that, and I respect your conviction and hope we can work together elsewhere within the kingdom. I responded to Steve Deace with this. Christians will have to reconcile the fact we're now in the minority in America. The RNC excised pro-life, traditional marriage, biblical values, and pastors to instead affirm the LGBTQ log cabin Republicans and platform a Satanist, self-described slut, and a Sikh prayer. The majority of Republicans now also affirm godless values and inclusivity at the expense of truth. We are in culture. If you didn't believe it before, there is no denying it now. We will have to view ourselves more like Daniel to Darius than Aaron to Moses. Daniel was a very high-level and powerful advisor to a pagan king while never compromising truth or hiding his faith in the one true God. While I have earnestly lobbied to choose national leadership more wisely, a Moses over a Darius, we are here with these options in this moment and its reality. We can walk as Christians even in a pagan society. But make no mistake, this week is a turning point in America. I really, truly do believe that, because as we look at a godless populism that has taken over the Republican Party, Christians have been talking about this in the background for the last several months. I've been part of many of those discussions and have heard about it secondhand through a lot of different sources. Christians are very concerned with the direction of the culture and specifically the Republican Party. Now, I'm not here as a spokesperson for the RNC or simply as a Republican parroting this platform that we've seen from a wide variety of GOP operatives that are suggesting that the party is the best that it's ever been, and that if you don't get behind it, then you're not in the vehicle that is directing the future of America and making America great again. That's not where I'm at. I'm also not, of course, saying that the Democrats have it any better. In fact, they are far worse. They are for a rapidly declining and completely godless society with their emphasis on cultural Marxism, godlessness, and a completely pagan society that worships child sacrifice, that worships the God of the age and the sexual revolution, and ultimately a sense of self and globalism. That's the utopia that the Democrats prefer. I'm not at all suggesting that MAGA and populism isn't at least a little bit better than that. I think that Steve Deace got it right. But what he also pointed out that I echoed in my response to him is what I want you to get from this particular segment. We as Christians are facing a turning point that we haven't been in our lifetimes. For as long as I can remember, we have always had evangelical, conservative, and Christian leaders at the forefront in politics. The left has been claiming separation of church and state and all of this nonsense, and they've never liked that Christians have been at the fore of political engagement. But we've always at least seemed like we've been in the majority. We've always at least had a platform, and we've also had a leader that has recognized that evangelical Christians are a very important base. Now, even Politico recognized earlier this week that Donald Trump is so popular within the GOP that he really doesn't have to woo any sort of ideological base. That means that Christians may not really have the platform that we've grown accustomed to. So where does this leave us? Well, like I've said, if you read the account of Daniel in the book of Daniel in the Bible, it talks about how Daniel, who was a Jewish captive in a pagan nation, first the Babylonian Empire, then it fell to the Medo-Persians, he was under pagan leadership and leadership that did not agree with his worldview. Now, did he separate and say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't possibly support this type of pagan leadership because if I advise a pagan king, then somehow I'm not a Christian? No, he was actually one of the foremost and highly powerful, influential advisors to the king himself. But that cost him something as well, because he always stood firm in truth. This is where I think that the Christian conservative needs to recognize we are in this moment. In 2016, I still remember having a conversation with a good friend of mine who would ultimately go on to work for Donald Trump in his administration in HHS. I, of course, ended up working for Donald Trump as well. And we were talking about those who criticized at the time any Christian who is willing to work for Donald Trump. What I said at the time is that I would much rather have so many Christians around him that his administration and his campaign couldn't help but be influenced by Christians and by the truth. That remains even more important today. We can't allow the Christian ethic to be watered down or our voice to become just the minority. If we look at what happened on the RNC stage, platforming a Satanist, having prayers to pagan gods, literally from the RNC platform stage, we have to recognize that this is our time to stand up firmly, object very clearly to those false religions, those false worldviews, and those false political policy statements like what came out of the RNC platform. But we have to do that while still participating as a whole. Now, I'm not a registered Republican. I don't particularly plan to be. But at the same time, I recognize that at least there is an opportunity to go and influence Donald Trump like we did in 2016 and 2020 and still make our voices heard. And I think that most pro-life organizations, most conservative organizations recognize that Donald Trump will at least be more sympathetic to our goals, our values, and our policy platforms than a Joe Biden or a Kamala Harris would ever be, because their worldview is 100% antithetical to ours. Donald Trump just needs to be influenced by more Christians, and even more so heading into what I believe will be a next administration of Donald Trump. Now, did I prefer that a Ron DeSantis would have been the nominee in the selection because he was willing from the stage to proclaim the name of Jesus Christ, to advance conservative values, to be unashamedly pro-life, to be traditional marriage, all of the things that we stand for? Well, yes, of course. But if we are in a post-Christian and post-truth society, is it any wonder that the majority of the base didn't recognize that he was the better candidate? We are here with Donald Trump in this moment. And if there's anything that I know personally about my time in DC and working directly with then President Trump, is that he does want a multitude of advisors around him. And if I still have the opportunity, and I would encourage you, if you have the opportunity, always take advantage to proclaim the truth to our kings, to our leaders, to every public official. Because it matters that we don't just stand down and we don't just criticize, that we actually have solutions. We need to meet this moment with truth. We need to stand up for truth. We don't need to water it down, but we need to be engaging the party, the platform, and the candidate with that truth, with solutions, and with encouragement, and especially prayer. I am praying for the future of this nation. And if we truly want to proclaim and receive the blessings of liberty that we have over the last 250 years, Christians cannot stand down in this moment. It is even more important as a minority, almost as a remnant, that we stand up firmly and we engage in our body politic so that truth in community can be advanced in our politics. That's where I'm at, and I hope you'll join me. We'll be right back. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use My Pillows are just $25. My Pillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium My Pillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. So where does conservatism go from here, and what is the direction of our country when we are seeing so much that is just polar opposite views from the left versus the right? But increasingly the Overton window is shifting, and what was once a Democrat now can potentially be said as Republican. So let's bring in Walker Wildmon, who's the vice president of the American Family Association and also host of At the Core on American Family Radio Network, where I also host Jenna Ellis in the morning, each and every weekday morning. So Walker, you and I have discussed this quite a bit because, of course, Christians have always said that we need to be part of government. We need to pray for our leaders. We need to influence our leadership. We know that government is an institution ordained by God, and we need to faithfully steward that. So in a polarizing, divisive age where we're even questioning things like what is a woman, and we're seeing some of the things that came out of the RNC convention, unfortunately, like prayers to false gods. I mean, having a Sikh prayer up on the national stage would have been unthinkable even a few years ago. Where does the country go from here, and particularly conservatism?
Well, evangelical Christians have enjoyed a seat at the table for a long, long time in this country, really since its inception. Now, there's been ebbs and flows where certain administrations and parties have rejected evangelical Christians' seat at the table. But nonetheless, let's go back to 2016. If it weren't for evangelical Christians in 2016, President Trump would have not served a first term. And he knew that. That's why he had people like Dr. Robert Jeffress, my dad, Tim Wildmon, Tony Perkins, and others at the table in 2016 to help him get elected. But here we are in 2024, and largely there are no major evangelical Christian leaders at the table with President Trump counseling him that we're aware of. Once again, this is just based off publicly available information. But the question of where to go from here, I think this is a hard pill to swallow, that basically evangelical Christians have been giving, the cold shoulder with a party that has relied heavily on us to win elections. So not to mention the vast majority of people that worked for Trump last time were also Christians as well, and sacrificed a lot to advance his agenda and the betterment of our country. So I think we're just going to have to really take this dose of humility that they think they don't need us anymore. Maybe they'll need us during a second Trump term to serve in the administration. But right now, the outreach with the campaign to the Christian community is basically non-existent. But I think we have a duty to do, and that is to speak truth and to serve when we're able. So this is a challenging time. But, I have a little bit more respect for the RNC and the Trump campaign now than I did for the establishment, because what the establishment has done historically is they've basically done this same thing where they act like they don't need us and they reject us behind closed doors, but publicly they act like we're the best thing since sliced bread. But now the Trump campaign is openly rejecting evangelical Christians as being a part of the campaign and the administration. So at least they're being public about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can say that. But, while the RNC platform and the Trump campaign have embraced so-called inclusivity with the log cabin Republicans coming out with that statement saying that, Trump is the standard bearer of the LGBTQ advancements in the party agenda. I mean, it seems like there's been a substitution here, really. And with former First Lady Melania Trump campaigning and holding fundraisers for the log cabin Republicans, there's been a substitution of that ideology for what has historically been the seat at the table for the evangelical Christians. And so I said in the monologue that, that Christians, even in 2016, when a lot of the prevailing wisdom was, let's not touch Trump, he's too toxic, we don't even want to work for him. I said at the time, and then I made good on that if I was ever given the opportunity to advise Trump, I would go in just with an understanding of standing for truth and to influence where I could. And I did that. And I hope that Republicans will give evangelicals the opportunity to still do that in a second Trump administration. Do you think that there are ways that we can still make inroads when we're being told pretty publicly that we're not welcome anymore?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a litany of opportunities for people like you and me, not specifically you and me, but people that think like us to serve in the second Trump administration and to make a positive impact. And who knows, maybe this is campaign strategy, and Trump's second term strategy involves some of the great minds that were in the administration last go around to get things done. But I'll tell you what, long term, this could have short term. I think that the Trump administration, a second term, could be very beneficial for our country on multiple fronts, specifically with judges, foreign policy, and economic policy. But long term, these changes in the RNC, where they're moving more secular and a broad rejection of Christianity in principle, long term is going to have some pretty devastating consequences, because we're sending a very blurry message to the public as to what the Republican Party actually stands for. Because on issues like life and marriage, when you read the party platform now, you really don't know what those things are. So I think long term, this is going to hurt our messaging and our clarity. But I think once we get past this election cycle, I'm hoping that evangelicals and the Republican Party more broadly can get back to a place where we clearly define what absolute truth is. And that means that life begins at conception and marriage is between a man and a woman. I mean, those are two core tenets of Christianity that have also been a part of the Republican Party platform that have since been rejected. So we've got to get back to what is absolute truth, what are the non-negotiables, before we can really advance the Republican Party agenda for 10 or 20 years down the road.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly not a consensus in terms of the coalition. And as much as the Republican Party would like to say, well, we're a big tent and we're now even more inclusive, well, including mutually incompatible and mutually exclusive ideas necessarily excludes one or the other. And of course, you and I would say that any false premise and anything that is inconsistent with truth should and deserves to be excluded, because we stand on truth. But right now, it seems like the Republican Party is going in a different direction. So what would you say to the Christians who are just saying, well, we got to get out of this altogether, we can't, forget it? How can we actually affect that change while not succumbing to a platform and watering down the truth?
Yeah, sitting on the sidelines is never an option. Really, under any circumstances, sitting on the sidelines isn't an option. So I think we've got to be involved, and we've got to be influential when given the opportunity, because things come and go, candidates come and go. This is going to be, should Trump get elected, this is going to be his last term. He's going to be a lame duck from day one. So who's going to be here in 4 years at the table, advancing absolute truth and a godly agenda in our country? So we're the ones that have to be at the table. So we just got to stick this out, do the best we can with what we have. And there's one thing for sure, and that Donald Trump is better than Joe Biden. That's a 100% factual statement. So we've just got to get the best we can done while the time we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Walker Wildmon, I want to hold you over into the next segment, because it's also important to talk about the federal judiciary and the nominees, because that was one of the most important considerations for evangelicals in 2016 when, we rallied around Donald Trump, because at that point there was a vacancy on the U.S. Supreme Court. There may be in the next 4 years, it's in fact likely that there will be at least one, if not two vacancies on the U.S. Supreme Court, but there's always a litany of federal judges. So how important is it that conservatives also make our voices heard for good federal judiciary selections? We'll be right back with more to answer that. My fellow Americans, we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been an absolute disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a consistent issue, and high interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East that have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even amid the tensions. There are so many reasons that Americans just like you and me should consider investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero hassle, education first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com, that's legacypminvestments.com, to download their free gold investing guide. I've read it and there is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is not the time to roll the dice with your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals today and tell them that I sent you. Continuing the conversation with Walker Wildmon, who is the Vice President of the American Family Association and host of At the Core on American Family Radio Network. And Walker, judges and personnel are really key aspects of any administration, but especially a potential to shape America for the next 40 plus years. Man, we're already seeing really significant wins from the first Trump administration with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, with federal appointments that have led to very good opinions, some, not so good, but we can't win them all, but at least some really good jurisprudence that's coming from the Supreme Court and other inferior courts. So how important is it to focus on the federal judiciary and also personnel?
Yeah, these two things, personnel and judges, are really going to be, I believe, a key tenet of a second Trump administration should he get elected, because his mark that he left on the judiciary is still living today, and it'll be on there for a couple more decades with some of these judges that are only in their 40s that serve lifetime appointments. So personnel, I would say, it's going to be interesting to see during the transition, should President Trump get elected, the kind of people he surrounds himself, because it's one thing to go this campaign route of big tent, bring everybody in and really cast shade on the evangelical Christians. But it's another thing to pick people to run the administration. So it's going to be very important who he surrounds himself, but also the judges. I mean, this is what I want people to understand is that the likely next two vacancies would be Thomas and Alito, just purely from an age and retirement vantage point. We don't want them to retire. They're some of the best judges that have served on the Supreme Court. But practically speaking, those two are likely going to be the next two to retire. If it's in a Trump administration, what I want people to understand is that those two justices, Thomas and Alito, are the best of the best. If we put a Gorsuch or Kavanaugh in place of Thomas and Alito, that's actually regressing. That's actually making the court move more to the left. So we have to get the future vacancies at the Supreme Court right. We need to get 5 out of 5 stars. That's why here at AFA Action, we're actually doing research, and we have a green list on people that would be excellent judges and justices on the Supreme Court should President Trump get the opportunity to appoint.
And that is really important, that vetting process, because it seems like there was a little bit of not a breakdown necessarily, but not necessarily as thorough a vetting for some of those judicial appointments. And there was also a wide variety of opinions. So what are some of the metrics that AFA Action is looking at for federal judicial nominees?
Yeah, we're looking at all the traditional stuff, all the writings, all the rulings, all the opinions, all the speeches. But one thing we're looking at that others aren't is has this individual displayed courage before? Because it's one thing to write the right things and to say the right things, but have they actually done the right thing when under pressure? I mean, the Supreme Court is under the most political pressure and public pressure arguably in its history, with attempted assassinations on Kavanaugh and the protesting outside of their homes. the ability to display courage in the moment of pressure and tension is very, very important. So we're looking at, have these individuals been under pressure? Have they displayed courage while under the pressure? That's very, very important, because that's what we need in the future. And Thomas is Exhibit A. I mean, Justice Clarence Thomas has displayed courage in moments of high pressure, where there's been a lot of pressure on him to cave or move to the left. So courage is one thing we're looking at. Very difficult to gauge, but we have to look at it. We have to look at it because it's going to come into practice.
Yeah, and we've said for a long time that the two political branches often among the Republican Party don't exhibit sufficient political will to actually use their power of their elected office to advance conservative values and principles. And it's the same thing in the judiciary. Even though they're not a political branch, there is still political pressure, and have an obligation under the Constitution to actually use their office to ensure that the Constitution is protected and preserved and issue good opinions. So I think that's a really great metric, but Walker Wildmon, really appreciate it. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, as we continue to talk about the RNC convention and the Republican ticket that is now Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, does the opportunity for evangelical Christians still remain to influence the top two people on the ticket? Well, joining me now is fellow millennial Jeff Hunt, who is on Salem Radio Network out of Denver. And Jeff, I am really excited, actually, that finally we have a younger representation of the new generation that is up and coming. What are your thoughts on J.D. Vance and the convention overall, when really, this seems to be going in a direction of populism instead of true conservatism?
Well, that's a big concern, Jenna. You're right to be pointing this out, right? You saw what happened with the platform committee last week that was just recently voted upon yesterday. Look, conservatives, particularly Christian conservatives involved in the Republican Party, need to be the anchor to keep this thing from drifting. And look, I was a political strategist for many years. I get it. At the end of the day, many politicians just want to get across the finish line and win. That's like their top goal, right? I got to win. Well, when you get into like Republican Party platform issues, we need to remind people what it is that we believe, what makes us Republicans, the core foundation of our politics, our political beliefs, our philosophy, our faith. That's all what we bring to the table here. And I want to take a moment to just kind of talk about the platform. I'm disappointed to see the Republican Party take a step back from its deep commitments to the sanctity of life. I signed a letter along with many other pro-life leaders that said, we as Republicans have been moving forward to advance policies that protect preborn children. And this current platform, in an effort to kind of shy away from our principles, is trying to, say, well, maybe we'll let the states decide this, or even what J.D. Vance said on Meet the Press when he said that I'm okay with mifepristone being prescribed. That's the abortion drug. No, we're not. It's an innocent human life. We stand on the fact that life is sacred, that it is God-given to us, and that the government has a role in protecting it. So, I just want to encourage conservatives, and particularly evangelical Catholic conservatives, to stay the course with our principles. I understand we have an election to win in November, but that's just step one. We're going to have 4 years with maybe that's his new name, a Trump-Vance presidency, where we're going to be able to advance Christian conservative principles. So November election, step one. After that, we're going to have a lot of work to do to secure good Christian conservative principles in our lawmaking.
Yeah, really well said, Jeff. And I was very happy to see your name. And I signed that same letter from the Advancing American Freedom Coalition that, brought over 100 different conservative voices, individuals, and organizations to say that, we just stand firm for what the party has always stood for, for the last 50 and 60 years. And in fact, even beyond that in our whole history. And we shouldn't be changing that just for a wider tent, because ultimately, if you don't stand for anything, then you fall for everything. And that seems to be where this kind of wide tent mentality of the Republican or MAGA conservatism is going. And so, the question that I've been getting from a lot of people, and I'm really interested in your view on this, do you think that it was a mistake for evangelicals to coalesce around Donald Trump in 2016? When he was the nominee. Now, my view, of course, is, hey, Roe versus Wade is overturned. That we have great judges at the Supreme Court level. There are so many different wins of Donald Trump. So I will take that over Hillary Clinton 4 years. But at the same time, do you think that ultimately for the long term, it's been a concession that we didn't really anticipate to have kind of this MAGA populism really capturing the Republican Party?
I'm not too concerned, but it's something I am definitely watching. A few things about this. And Jenna, you know this probably better than anybody else. There's a unique brand of conservatism. It's particularly popular in Colorado that goes, we'd really win a lot if we just got rid of those social issues. You pro-lifers, you evangelicals and Catholics with traditional marriage, we just need to get you out of the way, and then we'll really start to win. And it's critical. It's absolutely critical that we remind people you're never going to have limited government if you don't have strong and healthy families. We're never going to have a good society if we continue to kill off millions of preborn children. This is absolutely central to the health of our nation. And so it's important for social conservatives to continue to speak up. As you mentioned, Jenna, Donald Trump was the first president of the United States to attend the March for Life. His appointments at the U.S. Supreme Court level helped bring an end to Roe v. Wade. So is he tacking a little bit more populist? I understand it. I understand that especially electorally, pro-lifers are not doing that well right now. We have some work to do culturally, okay? But with a Trump-Vance administration, we'll get a lot of great people going into that administration. I think they'll continue to do really good work to advance the sanctity of life. I asked the same question to our friend Paul Teller, Jenna, and he said we're going to get work done in a Trump-Vance administration, even if the policy platform is not as strong. But there is a concern. And Paul, I'm going to give Paul Teller credit for this, that if it's not at the forefront of the Trump-Vance administration to advance the sanctity of life, then it may not become a priority. And that's something we need to hold them accountable to.
Yeah. And, and our friend Paul Teller, who was in the prior Trump administration, was one of the ones at the forefront of that coalition, wanting the party platform to remain strong for life. And I give him full credit for that. He has been working very hard behind the scenes in Washington, D.C. for a while to advance conservative priorities. And so, make no mistake for everyone listening. I mean, it's not like conservatives have just retreated or that we're just sitting here complaining on national television. We are also advancing those priorities, having these difficult conversations also behind the scenes. And, Jeff, in your circles and understanding from your vantage point how Washington works, I mean, these are the conversations we need to have publicly so that we can make some of the advancements privately and also behind the scenes as well. And so I'm hopeful that a Trump-Vance administration will still bring evangelical Christians to the table so that some of these priorities can at least be discussed. And while, some people have said, Donald Trump's going to be a lame duck day one, I don't really see that because he used the power of executive orders in a really good way his first administration. I don't see him sort of just sitting back and, like he's done the last couple of years, playing golf almost every day while he's campaigning, which he can do, and he's still very popular. I don't see him approaching a second administration like that. I think he genuinely wants to turn the economy around and actually have policy priorities.
Well, and you know this, Jenna, there's a lot of good conservatives in the Washington, D.C. area that have been working over the last 4 years to put together a policy roadmap for when another Republican was elected to the White House. So in 2016, his win kind of caught Republicans off guard, and they were building the airplane as it was taking off. Now they're prepared. And you see this with Project 2025, our friends at the Heritage Foundation. They're going to be ready to work with the Republican administration to achieve real results against the deep state, to advance pro-family policies, to possibly take down the Department of Education. From my lips to God's ears, please, can we take down the Department of Education? By the way, for the love of God, get your kids out of government-run schools at this point. But I think you'll see conservatives.
And somewhere all of the ladies at The View are screaming right now that you mentioned Project 2025 and how dare you, and democracy is on the line. Oh my gosh, because, hey, conservatives actually want to populate the Trump administration. I mean, I think that's just so ridiculous. But Jeff, we got to take a break here, but I want to keep you over into the next segment to continue this conversation and have a discussion really of, where we go from here in terms of populating a new Trump administration and all of the things for conservatism right after this. And I'm back with Jeff Hunt, who is a Salem, Denver radio host. And Jeff, I want to shift gears a little bit because the nation, I think, is still reeling from the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. I mean, it took me a solid 24 hours to even process this. I mean, I know that some who are watching remember where they were when the attempted assassination of President Reagan happened. And then there are even some that remember JFK's actual assassination. But at least in my lifetime, this is certainly a first. And it's also a first of someone who I know personally, who I worked for, and I know his family. And to see him come into the RNC convention earlier this week, kind of WWE style, the bandage on his ear, looking I think really emotional and very moved and touched by the welcome reception that, obviously he was going to get, but it just seemed like it was a little bit different for him. What was your response overall to just the entire scope of where America is at in the aftermath of something like this?
Yeah, well, let's start first with him walking in at the RNC convention. My goodness, my heart was pounding with pride for this man who just 48 hours before survived an assassination attempt, the first one that had taken place against a president or presidential candidate in 42 years. Okay, he, within 48 hours, is walking triumphantly into the RNC convention with a bandage on his ear. It was inspirational. It is what it is to be an American. And when you contrast him with a president, a current president, who can barely put a sentence together, who spends his day, going to bed at 8 p.m. because he can't handle the stress of the job, the contrasts are huge. I was so proud of President Trump. I'm grateful he's the Republican nominee. And I think he showcased what Republican strength and courage looks like. It was amazing. But when you go back to what happened 48 hours prior to that, it was a gut punch that this is the America we live in. Look what they have done to him. They have drugged him before these legal tribunals. They tried to bankrupt him. They put him in mug shots. They tried to keep him off the ballot. Here in Colorado, our state tried to do that. Horrible. Then he faces this. They have tried everything to try to stop this man. It was heartbreaking to see that that's where we've gotten in this country. But look, Jenna, I think the American people at their gut level, instinctually do not want to live in a country where one political party treats its political opponents like this. They don't want it. And they're going to vote in big numbers to put Donald Trump back into the presidency to try to reset this and to send a message that this country does not do this to its political opponents, whether it's lawfare, whether it's bankruptcy, whether it's mugshots, whether it's little scams to keep you off the ballot. We don't want this. And I think they're going to get behind him and support him in a big way. I was very proud to see him. I think, like you said, Jenna, I think this may be a life-changing moment from him. He was an inch away from losing his life. Like Ronald Reagan, that changes your perspective. And it's a good reminder to all of us. We're only, each day, only an inch away from meeting our Lord and Savior. So you got to be right with Jesus Christ.
Amen to that. And that is overall the message that America needs to hear. And I hope that we do see a spiritual revival in this country, recognizing that we are in such a divided time, a difficult time. And there was such a contrast even between the rally tenor versus him entering the RNC for the first time on Monday night. And even just seeing, in just the last 2 minutes we have here, I mean, even seeing just the difference in his security staff. I mean, there have been a lot of different, commentators on what exactly happened in terms of those failures. But it was very interesting to see the difference of all of those, many, many strong, tall men that surrounded him, unlike maybe some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion hires that were at the rally there in Pennsylvania. Your thoughts on that in just the last minute we have?
Yeah, look, I'm very proud that women can serve in the Secret Service. I think they should be able to. But if you're physically guarding somebody, you need to be big enough to block and protect them, and also strong enough to be able to carry them by yourself. And if you can't meet those needs, you shouldn't be guarding somebody. That is a lesson learned from this assassination attempt against Donald Trump.
Yeah, really well said. And, I am so grateful that Donald Trump is still here, survived all this. Jeff Hunt, thank you so much for your insights. We're going to be continuing to talk about the political fallout, where America goes from here. So tune in to Jenna Ellis Tonight each and every night, 9 p.m. Eastern here on the Salem News Channel, and then streaming on X and anywhere you stream podcasts. I will see you on Monday.